Okay, great. Good morning. I'd like to go ahead and open the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting for March 16th. And first item on the agenda, I wanted to let folks know that we are starting our live streaming today. And if you are following us and you have comments that you'd like for us to know, you can send those comments to otcadmin@odot.state.or.us. That is otcadmin@odot.state.or.us. And we will go ahead and begin with the director's report. Director Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. First, it is my pleasure to inform the Commission that the Oregon Department of Transportation has earned the State of Oregon's Chief Financial Office's Gold Star Certificate for the fiscal year 2016. The Chief Financial Office's Gold Star Certificate is awarded to state agencies that provide accurate and complete fiscal year-end information in a timely manner. This certificate is Oregon's equivalent to the nationally recognized Government Finance Officer Association Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. So I would like to extend my congratulations to the ODOT financial team for this accomplishment and the kudos that have come their way. Second issue and the third issue are going to deal with distracted driving. April is indeed Distracted Driving Awareness Month. I've had the privilege of sharing some thoughts with some legislative committees. There are a couple pieces of legislation moving through both chambers specific to distracted driving, so to speak. I argue that distracted driving behavior has become pervasive and entrenched in our society. It's become an epidemic that is facing our country and state, with fatalities and injuries increasing each year. The Oregon Department of Transportation, the Oregon State Police, and AAA Oregon Idaho brought professionals from a variety of backgrounds to work together to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes by changing the cultural norms around distracted driving. This distracted driving task force was composed of about 20 different organizations, subject experts in the fields of transportation, of academia, of research, law enforcement, the courts, communication, healthcare, as well as legislators. The task force focused efforts on producing recommendations through 4 subcommittees. These subcommittees engaged in root cause analysis to determine the primary causes of distracted driving in the state of Oregon. Identification of these root causes were vital to guiding the overall discussion and assisted in developing the recommendations to address distracted driving. I speak to just one major root cause that was identified, and this was communication and the silos that have built up around this between the stakeholders, all the stakeholders that are involved in the area of distracted driving. And the task force made a recommendation to coordinate our approaches for education and media campaigns. Coordination between education and communication, they argued, is a very powerful tool in reducing, or they believe it's a very powerful tool in reducing distracted driving. And the task force strongly supports the development of positive messagings to empower Oregonians to engage in healthy driving to decrease the distractions here. Their line of thinking and argument are engagement and the commitment of family, of friends, of coworkers, and healthy driving disciplines. It's seen as a powerful tool in reducing those behaviors. So with that said, why have I teed this up? Well, we're going to engage in a communication pilot for all intents and purposes using our variable message signs for a distracted driving campaign. This pilot's purpose is to test what types of messages work effectively for the driver to change behavior as well as not distract from safety. So beginning each Friday in March and into April, we will post creative VMS messages on our boards located on I-5 in the southern part of our state here. The messaging then will be measured using established metrics and methods, including online survey tools, social media engagement, public sentiment engagement, as well as media buy equivalents. So I would ask all in this room, all that are listening, to be on the lookout for these creative messages in this regional pilot, and to be sure that you share your thoughts either through email, social media, or contact the Oregon Department of Transportation. Again, we're trying to communicate, working with a host of folks. That takes me to the second issue. And as I mentioned, April is indeed Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And we will hold an event at the Capitol on April 6th. ODOT will be hosting a Distracted Driving Awareness event in the Capitol Mall there, marking the one-year anniversary of the ODOT, OSP, and AAA partnership to combat distracted driving statewide. Last year, this partnership was announced along with the creation of the task force I just spoke to, as well as the deployment of 40 unmarked OSP patrol cars that were used in the first year of this campaign to fight the epidemic of distracted driving. ODOT and OSP also created 2 distracted driving public service announcements that were made and distributed to TV and radio markets in the state of Oregon and Washington. This PSA was based on the Alexis Theringer story to impact, to make people pause and reflect, and the objective is to stop distracted driving behaviors here. Her story has been shared with Oregon and Washington legislators, and again was a jump-off point for the engagement with the pieces of legislation that I spoke about earlier. What I'd like to do is just share with the Commission a 30-second snippet of the Alexis Theringer story. So.
My daughter Lexi was full of energy and full of compassion. She had a lot to give. She was very social. Her phone was always going off. Something had to have drawn her eyes off the road. It just takes that one moment.
We want everyone to arrive home safely. That's why we've increased the number of unmarked cars in our fleet, to seek out and stop distracted drivers before something else does. Please, drive without distractions.
So, Madam Chair, again, that is a PSA that lasts about 1 minute and 30 seconds in its entirety that tells the very sad story of that beautiful young woman who is no longer with us. And we want to make sure we do everything we can to prevent that and to animate the disciplines and the protocols for our vision of 0 deaths by 2035. This is just one element. We are just one component, but we are leaning into this as an agency, working with our partners to bend the line, so to speak, on distracted driving as well as fatalities here in the state of Oregon. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand down.
Thank you, Director Garrett. Oh, please.
Could I just say, I've seen the message board between Ashland and Medford several times with these clever messages, and it works for me. I mean, you have a little chuckle, and it's just a little sort of kick in the pants to remind you, hey, there's no need to be talking on your phone right now.
Sure. Well,
And
thank you. I appreciate that insight.
I think we have a responsibility, obviously, with safety being our #1 goal and priority, but also we can change this culture. We have done it before, and I think that it is through these types of programs and partnerships that we've been able to affect change. So is there an opportunity for us on April 6th to join in the discussion? And
Madam Chair, I would certainly welcome
Okay.
anywhere. I mean, like I say, we'll be out on the mall trying to tell our story to
Okay.
anyone and everyone who will listen.
Excellent. So if any of my colleagues would like to join in, I just would welcome that as well. So thank you very much. Next, we have legislative update. Ms. Horner, please. Hi. Things have been busy, have they not?
Good morning, Chair Boehne and Commissioners. Leah Horner, Government Relations for ODOT. I just wanted to come forward this morning and give you a very brief update on kind of what's been happening over at the Capitol over the last number of weeks. I'm going to start quickly with an update on our agency bills, and you have a little handout in front of you that's just a quick summary of the 12 that we brought forward this session. All of them so far are moving very well. The ones that I will just highlight briefly are a couple that either have had some amendments or will be modified slightly through the process. House Bill 2289 on page 2 was our fuels tax housekeeping bill. Once we reached session, we realized the timing on this one was not quite right. So we've decided to stand down from that one at this particular moment in time. Kind of in conjunction with that, however, on the last page is House Bill 2293, which was our fuels tax policy bill. And if you recall, there were two components in that. One was the import-export issue that we were working on as good neighbors with Washington State. And the other component of that was an early sunset on B20. What we have decided to do is pull those two pieces apart, since they are both slightly controversial in their own right, and stuff the import-export issue into the fuels tax housekeeping bill. So we'll be running those two issues still simultaneously, but so lawmakers have the opportunity to weigh in on them individually instead of in the same bill. So the other one I'll highlight, House Bill 2290, was our cost recovery bill. It had a public hearing in the House Transportation Policy Committee yesterday, and actually had quite positive feedback on that. I think there is some question about how we should get to a cost recovery model at DMV while also engaging in a conversation about fee increases around a transportation funding package. But the indications are that this bill will move to Ways and Means and be primed for additional conversation should we choose to do that moving forward. On page 3, House Bill 2291 was our motor carrier changes. This had three components, one of which we knew was going to be slightly controversial, and that was around the hazardous materials component. We did get the angst that we had anticipated from the Farm Bureau around that, and rightly so, and we have amended that piece out. The component of that what would allow us eligibility for MCSAP funding from the federal government, and because that has been removed, that's just one of the pieces that I wanted to make sure you all were aware of. Other than that, everything else on our list is moving fairly nicely. A couple other overarching policy things that I'll just bring to your attention that we're engaged in. One, yesterday, the mandatory road usage charge program bill had a hearing. This bill would outline that all vehicles from 2025 forward with MPG of 20 or greater would be required to enroll in a mandatory road usage charge program. Again, given the funding conversation, I think folks are aware that we need to do something at some point in the future. Whether or not this bill will be the bill to bring that forward is yet to be determined, but it was a good starting point for the future conversations around the gas tax. Another policy piece that I think we've chatted about is autonomous vehicles. There are two bills in the legislature this session around AVs. Neither of them have been scheduled as of yet, but I do expect them to get scheduled and possibly move to a work group so that we can have further conversation about what legislation might look like this session moving forward. Another policy area that we've been involved in over the past year and a half is the move for us as a state to clean diesel. The reason I highlight this is because there is a bill as drafted that would take a set aside of CMAQ funds and put that towards clean diesel retrofit as a requirement for expenditure of CMAQ money. So that is something that is also having a lot of conversation in the building this session. Finally, one other policy bill that I'll bring to your attention is around lane splitting. There is a bill that has been introduced and will be heard on Monday. And the Governor's Motorcycle Safety Advisory Committee as well as the Transportation Safety Committee have both voted to oppose this bill. And in light of that, the Governor's office has also given us direction to oppose this bill, which Mr. Costales will be doing at the hearing on Monday. Finally, our budget hearings will be up on the 21st through the 28th, I believe, with public testimony being at the tail end of that. All of our division administrators will be coming up and discussing their budget for next biennium, which is tradition, I guess, in the budget arena. And so that'll be kind of our focus next week. And then finally, the Joint Transportation Committee that has been meeting and discussing around transportation funding package. I think you're all aware that they have broken out into 4 work groups that is meeting twice a week in the evenings, and it is congestion, preservation and maintenance, multimodal, and transit. And the charge of each of these groups has really been to go forth and come up with what your ideal funding package would look like, and then they're all going to reconvene and bring those topics forward. The game plan at this point for them is to have report outs from each of those 4 work groups starting next Monday, and it'll be preservation and maintenance on Monday. On Wednesday, it'll be a multimodal and transit report out, and then the following Monday, it'll be a congestion report out. From there, what I've heard they intend to do is draft a bill. And they will have probably a number of iterations of bill drafting so that they can put all ideas out on the table and folks can come forward and do some target shooting at it, if you will, and then kind of figure out how to maneuver to a negotiation point from there. As we've discussed in the past, this is a new process for them in being very transparent and doing it in front of a committee of 14, which is quite a number of folks. So that's kind of the game plan for that. Legislators have indicated that they hope to have a bill on the House floor by sometime in May or early June. So that's kind of the target at this point. One overarching piece on this is that there is also a 5th work group around accountability, and that is one that we honestly have not been as engaged in, but is meeting also twice a week as of this week. And I think that the work around that will also inform the language in the bill and also kind of engagement as we move forward with that. So having said that, I think all of our stuff is moving quite well. The first deadline to post for a work session is April 7th, so we're getting there fairly quickly. And then bills have to have had a work session by April 21st in order to be considered viable to keep moving through the process. So we continue to move forward this session, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for your hard work. I know that that means late nights and early mornings, too. Questions at all? Okay. We'll continue to stay engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item, we have public comment, and I have one individual who has signed up. Ms. Hanson, I'd like to welcome you. Please do state your name for the record, and the floor is yours. And if there's anyone else who would like to approach the commission, please just raise your hand after we're finished. Thank you. And I believe if the blue light is on, then we can hear you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Hi.
Hi. Thank you. Hello, commissioners. Thank you. It's an honor to address you in a room named for Gail Ackerman. I was privileged to spend a day giving her a tour of the Molalla River Corridor. Her memory inspires me to work to make Oregon the best it can be. I forward you detailed observations about ongoing problems with ODOT's interactions with Molalla on grants and wasted ODOT staff time. Our public money is obviously limited and our infrastructure is aging. The examples I provided show years of money wasted on plans that were never implemented, only to have ODOT grant more TGM money for more plans. I have observed ODOT staff wasting a great deal of time trying to get Molalla to comply with ODOT mandates, with codes and their own transportation plan. In some cases, after months of ODOT staff input, the ODOT staff reverses and fails to follow through on demanding that Molalla follow the state and local codes. When ODOT caves on standards, we, the public, are often left with worse highway conditions. The recommend letters ODOT sends when plans impact state highways are also a problem. Recently, with the development on Molalla that will adjoin a state highway, Molalla chose to interpret recommend as a suggestion that could be ignored, causing months of ODOT staff time to be wasted. If ODOT is going to issue letters, ODOT needs to make it clear that it is an enforceable mandate. Otherwise, ODOT should stop wasting staff time and money on uncooperative cities with recommends ODOT does not intend to uphold. ODOT grant evaluations are not honest about whether or not a city has been cooperative with ODOT. ODOT fails to look closely at whether or not a city has adopted and implemented the elements of past grants. In the case of Molalla, I provided a long list of expensive grants that produce grandiose plans that have barely been implemented. It took 10 years for Molalla to adopt the $122,000 TGM Downtown Master Plan. Even worse, before the plan was adopted, ODOT granted $43,000 in quick grant study for a proposed development based on the unadopted plan, resulting in summary rejection by LUBA. Please review how ODOT staff spends time and money on recommend letters and is failing to honestly rate cities in grant reviews. We can't afford to continue to use public money to pile up plans in struggling cities that don't work in good faith to use the plans, that do not have the skill or financial ability to implement plans, that ignore codes, and that fail to willingly accept ODOT's input. Again, please note the big list I provided of do-overs, plans ignored, and ongoing disregard for accepting ODOT's sound advice to keep our roads as safe and functional as possible. Finally, I wish to commend your Assistant Director, Travis Brower, for his excellent job on being accessible and responsible for public input. He's been amazing to provide cell phones and get callbacks. So I appreciate that. Thank you for your time, and I hope you do read the input I provided.
Ms. Hanson, I
watched
wanted,
this for years.
Yes, I wanted to let you know that your information has been forwarded, and so we do have that. And I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing with us your concerns. Mr. Brower did let us know that you have his phone numbers as well, and we're actively engaged in making sure that we're doing what's right. So
Great. I
thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much
Thank
for
you
your
very much.
time. You bet. Would anyone else like to approach the commission? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to item D. It's a request for an approval of a Type A Immediate Opportunity Fund grant, Clatsop County. Mr. Chickering, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Boehne and Commissioners. This morning we have an item before you regarding an Immediate Opportunity Fund grant proposal. With me today I have two representatives from Business Oregon, Mr. Denny Hooley and Melanie Olson, and they'll be talking in detail about the project. Also in the audience today we have two representatives from Clatsop County who've made the trip down. They're the applicants for the funding, and they wanted to be here to show support for the application and the presentation today. I'm going to start with just a couple minute discussion of the department's Immediate Opportunity Fund policy guidelines, just as a review for the commission and the audience's benefit. And then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Hooley, who will continue on and discuss the project in more detail. The purpose of the Immediate Opportunity Fund is to support primary economic development in Oregon through the construction and improvement of streets and roads. Access to this fund is discretionary, and the fund may only be used when other sources of financial support are unavailable or insufficient, and therefore the IOF is not a replacement or a substitute for other funding sources. The IOF is specifically designed to meet the following objectives, and I'll read them to make sure I get them correct. Provide needed street or road improvements to influence the location, relocation, or retention of a firm in Oregon. Provide procedures and funds for the OTC Commission to respond quickly to economic development opportunities, and I think quickly is the operative word there. Provide criteria and procedures for Business Oregon, other agencies, local governments, and the private sector to work with the department in providing road improvements needed to ensure specific job development opportunities for Oregon or to revitalize business or industrial centers. So a strong emphasis on jobs and keeping jobs in the state and firms successful. I want to talk a little bit about the process. We don't have an actual advertisement period or a specific time when applicants can pursue these funds. It's generally open full-time, and the process for projects to be eligible, private businesses or their local government sponsors request assistance. They must involve Business Oregon and ODOT early in the process. There's a 4-step procedure. Business Oregon receives a request, evaluates for job impact and other economic merit. Then the ODOT Region IOF Coordinator reviews the project request for transportation eligibility and merit. And then the Business Oregon Director receives the ODOT Region Manager and Business Oregon Development Officer joint recommendation for moving forward with the application. And then upon OTC action, our director, Director Garrett, notifies the Business Oregon Director and the local government sponsor of the IOF award approval or denial. There are 4 types of projects that are eligible in the program, types A through D. Today's application is a type A project, which is intended for specific economic development projects that affirm job retention and job creation opportunities. Just quickly, type B are to revitalize business or industrial centers to support economic development. Type C, preparation of Oregon certified project-ready industrial sites, or type D, preparation of regionally significant industrial areas. The IOF is financed at a level of $7 million per biennium. However, there is a limit on how much money can be allocated to each type of project. For type A, they are actually eligible for the entire $7 million. However, each individual project is limited to $1 million. Type B can have up to $1 million in the biennium, with individual projects limited to $250,000. Type C, $1.5 million per biennium, $500,000 per project, and type D, up to $300 million per biennium, with a limit of $1 million per project. So, with that, just some information on the current standing of the funding in the available. For type A projects, so far there has been $4.9 million allocated out of a potential $7 million. For type B, there has been one project for $250,000. So a total of just over $5 million has been allocated, leaving $1.86 million available today for your consideration. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Hooley.
I have a quick question first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Do we require that the jobs be retained for a certain period of time?
Actually, I'm going to let Mr. Hooley talk about that.
Okay, great.
My name is Denny Hool. I'm a Regional Development Officer working in Marion, Yamhill, and Polk County since I just recently got reassigned in a reorganization of our department. So I'm going to introduce the project a bit because I have a history working in the North Coast for about 15 years. And then introduce Melanie Olson, who is the Regional Development Officer on the North Coast now, covering Tillamook, Clatsop, and Columbia counties. So it's a pleasure to bring this project to you. It's been a long time coming, quite frankly. When I was hired about 15 years ago working for the state, I became aware of a business park design and business plan and in Warrenton that the county owned. And over the years, we've worked to resolve some of the needs of that property so that it could be ready for development. It's been a long history, and they've worked through a couple business plans and have made some significant progress. Part of that business plan was to sell off some of the frontage roads on 101 that became commercial intentionally in Warrenton, and to use those proceeds to fund Ensign Road, which is actually a part of a state highway system, and a signal, and then take the remaining funds and reinvest it into the business park for sequential development. And so that's what we are here for, to talk about. And the first project in opportunity is related to Fort George Brewery, who is an incredible community business that operates currently in the city of Astoria in 2 historic buildings, and has grown from, when I first met them, about 30 some employees to over 100, 125 now. You may have seen that they were used in the lottery advertisements several years ago as because they are a recipient of a strategic reserve fund request from our agency when they wanted to be able to sell outside the region and they were out of money. And the reason we knew that is because as a team we worked with the company, the city of Astoria, Craft 3, the Small Business Development Center, all of our partners to understand where they were, and they weren't able to take the step without some outside assistance. We helped them with that outside assistance, and they continued to grow. But being in the city and being in two historical businesses, there was nowhere that they could find a warehouse. So that's why we're here today. I think after that, I would just like to introduce Melanie Olson. She's the Regional Development Officer serving Clatsop County, and she's going to present the rest of the project. So thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Melanie Olson, Regional Development Officer with Business Oregon. I serve the North Coast region of Clatsop, Columbia, and Tillamook counties. I'm here today to request your approval of a Type A Immediate Opportunity Fund request in the amount of $538,695 to Clatsop County for the purpose of constructing a connector road in the city of Warrenton. This connector road is needed to allow Fort George Brewery and Public House to continue to grow in the Northwest region. As Denny pointed out, they were out of space and have been looking for more than a year for a suitable location. Fort George Brewery and Public House began operations back in 2007, as Denny mentioned, in leased space in downtown Astoria. In 2010, and in order to accommodate significant growth, they purchased a 30,000 square foot warehouse in downtown Astoria, quadrupling the company's brewing capacity. This expansion allowed them to operate a new canning line, which allowed them to distribute to retail stores and also redistribute products from other small breweries in the Northwest. Fort George Brewery now employs 125 people and distributes its products to customers throughout the Northwest. As the demand for Fort George Brewery's products continued to grow, the company began looking for that suitable property for a warehouse, tap room, and small batch brewing for specialty brews. After looking for more than a year, as I mentioned, and with assistance from Clatsop Economic Development Resources and Business Oregon, the company identified a 10-acre parcel at the North Coast Business Park in the city of Warrenton. The North Coast Business Park is owned by Clatsop County and is designated as a regionally significant industrial area by the Economic Recovery Council in 2015. As you may recall, a RISIA, or Regionally Significant Industrial Area, is an area planned and zoned for industrial use that meets this criteria, contains vacant sites that are suitable for location of new industrial uses or the expansion of existing industrial uses, has characteristics that give the area significant competitive advantage, has superior access to transportation and freight, and is located in close proximity to major labor markets. As a condition of designation, the property cannot be rezoned and must remain an industrial area for 10 years. The project presented to you meets the IOF policy guidelines for Type A projects to affirm job retention and creation. The 525-foot lineal connector road will allow Fort George Brewery to construct a new 30,000 square foot warehouse with a cooler and climate-controlled facility, 2,500 square foot tap room, and a production area for small batch brewing. The total investment is $3 million. Fort George Brewery will also create 15 new jobs that pay an average wage of $33,000. The company provides its employees with a benefits package that includes medical insurance and paid vacation and sick leave. The jobs are primary jobs in the food and beverage industry, an industry identified by Business Oregon as a target industry due to its growth, statewide prosperity, innovativeness, and competitiveness. The development at Fort George Brewery will result in significant economic impact through job creation and represents an important capital investment in a rural and distressed area of Oregon. This property will be the first new development on industrial land in Clatsop County in quite some time. Establishment of the company's new facility is dependent upon the construction of this new connector road between Southeast Ensign Lane and 19th Street. Along with providing access to Fort George Brewery's property, the new road will provide access to a 7.5-acre vacant industrial zone property and will increase the attractiveness of that site. All the improvements will be in the public right-of-way, conform to access management policies, and serve general transportation needs. The road improvement project and the development meet all necessary land use and environmental regulations. Permits are in the process of being acquired and there are no known circumstances that exist that would prevent the development. The IOF request represents 50% of the estimated cost for the road improvements and 40% of the total project cost. The remaining funds will be provided by Clatsop County, and other infrastructure is available to the site. Finally, I'd like to note that the project meets 4 of the 7 regional priorities established by the Regional Solutions Team Advisory Committee. They are sustain and grow Northwest Oregon businesses in areas such as aerospace, marine-based industry, small manufacturing, tourism, forest products, and agriculture. It also supports innovation, business incubation, and the manufacturing of new product technologies. It meets the objective of improving the readiness of industrial land by addressing wetlands, transportation access, infrastructure, and other impediments, and also work with rural communities to plan, coordinate, fund, and install needed infrastructure. This project has been reviewed and recommended by Clatsop County, City of Warrenton, ODOT Region 2 Manager, OBDD, and the North Coast Regional Solutions Team. We respectfully request your approval of this request for Clatsop County for this important economic development project. And I would also like to point out that this project would not be possible without the leadership and vision of Clatsop County and Denny Houle, who's been in this position for 15 years, as well as the assistance of Jay Pudwell at ODOT. So I really appreciate that, and I feel honored to be able to present all of their good work.
This is Denny Houle again from Business Oregon. The specific question regarding retention of the jobs, it's my understanding that ODOT will take a look using information they have from WorkSource Oregon at a future date to make sure those jobs are retained in addition to the current jobs that they have in Astoria. And that's been routine. My experience has been that these projects are well enough developed and we've done enough work to know that this is going to work. I know this company well, and I believe that they are not only going to grow the jobs that they stated. We've been conservative. I think you'll see great things come from them. Just an aside, this is a company that really cares. They love the brewing industry. They're training a brewer for what could be a competitor across the river in their own facility. They distribute their beer to the Portland metro area in trucks, and they bring back beers from other small breweries in the area to be redistributed in on the coastal region. So they're a great community member. So it's a good company. So to answer your short question is that yes, we check, and the county has every confidence, and this is important to them because it's the money goes to them and they're responsible for being accountable, and so they're confident as well.
Excellent. What is the population of Warrenton, roughly? I'm thinking that 125 existing jobs and an additional 15 is significant to that community.
That's very significant in terms of Warrenton. They have a lot of commercial development that's going on in Warrenton. I think Warrenton, Jeff, I'm going to ask. About 5,000. I was going to say 5,000. And Astoria is around 10. So these jobs will be noticed.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent. Do we have questions? Please, we'll start with Commissioner Brown.
Just want to thank Sunny for giving the background. I think it's important for all of us to know what these projects do for all of the citizens of Oregon and why we do these and why we offer opportunities throughout the year. These are important projects. I've seen them in other areas and how they do bring the community up and really heighten the awareness of what ODOT can do, and just by connections. So I do appreciate the background and appreciate your background and your desire to see this. You can see it on your faces that this is a good project. Not sure about the brewing thing coming from a winery, but that's okay. I can handle that. So we won't let that affect, because I won't tell you how I partake. But thank you very much for the background and for bringing this to us.
Just a few little questions so I understand better. The business park, is that 10 acres essentially? Or am I misunderstanding that?
It is only a small portion of the business park.
For this project, but the overall business park, you mentioned 10 acres, and I'm trying to figure out how that fits in and how much this project is going to take of that 10 acres, if it is out of that.
A small portion.
Okay.
I believe the entire business park, some not being developed because there are wetlands, so there'll be a set aside. There are, I think the entire park is around 200 acres, and I could look back at Michael Summers, the Public Works Director, to confirm that. But, yeah, just...
Okay, and a portion of the business park has been taken up along the frontage road with commercial development.
That was according to the plan. The plan was to sell off the front portion, get Ensign Lane, which is, I believe, a bypass, to install that with signals, and then reinvest the money after completing Ensign Lane into the rest of the business park incrementally and strategically. And this is the very first project.
Okay, and so this road project will, you said, open up 7.5 acres of the overall business park for further development.
That's correct.
Is that 7.5 acres zoned industrial only, or can it be commercial and industrial?
The entire property is zoned for business development, not commercial, and the RESIA designation requires that it remain so for 10 years from the time it was designated. So we have another 8.5 years or so where there is no option to rezone. And we were quite concerned about the pressure for commercial development, knowing that businesses are looking for a place to locate. And Fort George looked for a 10-acre site for over a year, couldn't find one.
Well, and that's an issue. I mean, I'm glad to hear that 10-year limitation. Business development in Oregon is wrestling with a problem of shortage of industrial land continually, and letting it go to commercial can be problematical.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate hearing that the county is going to come up with 50% of the cost of this road. It's 15 jobs doesn't sound like all that much at $33,000, but I know in Clatsop County that's significant. I'm glad to see another Type A IOF project. I think that's what these monies ought to be spent primarily for. I did want to ask Sonny, there's about $1.3 million left. If we approve this project, there's about $1.3 million left until June 30th. I've forgotten how it works. If that doesn't get spent, does that roll over, or does it roll back into some other fund?
Commissioner Lohman, my understanding is that if the funds are not expended in this biennium, then they become a part of the next biennium's allocation in the STIP. There'll be a new $7 million that'll be allocated for this purpose. There'll be a pool of funds that are available, and as applications come in, the money will be expended much like we've done this biennium. Our goal, of course, is to try to expend all the funds in a given biennium, and I'm not aware whether we have others in the pipeline that will make it in time for this biennium or not, but we've expended something like 85% of the funds so far, so it's a good progress to date.
Thank you.
Hey, I think this is a great project, and it's exactly what we ought to be doing with this pot of money. This Fort George it's a great product if you haven't had it, and I hope we get to go down and christen this road. Because I know in that business, it's all about distribution. Your growth is about distribution and getting into that network. I think this project helps that. And you can't just go order a Fort George IPA, right? You got to pick from like 4 of them, right? So it's a great product. It's a good company, and it's a good story. And I hope they grow and add jobs and get their distribution out. And I hope this project helps.
Thank you. Commissioner Simpson?
Thanks. I would piggyback and concur with everything that all the fellow commissioners have already mentioned. primarily, more importantly, that this is a local entity and it's growing, and I support that and the economic development that comes from that. But my main question was, has there been any conversations around that additional 7.5 acres of vacant land, around what the plans are in order to foster more growth for that area in that region?
This is Denny Hooligan from Business Oregon. Would it be appropriate, and would you like to hear directly from the county manager, Cameron Moore, who's here regarding that? They're the owner and manager of the business park, and I would defer that question to him.
Sure, I think what I'd like to do is if we move forward with this particular piece, and then I think that just a few statements on what we can hope for in the future would be beneficial for us. So if we don't have other questions on this particular application, then I would welcome a motion.
I think we have the agenda item before us, but
Madam Chair, I move approval of the Type A Immediate Opportunity Fund grant.
There you go.
In the amount of $538,695 to Clatsop County to help cover the construction costs of a connector road from Southeast Ensign Lane and Southeast 19th Street in the city of Warrenton.
Excellent. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye. Thanks.
Motion carries. Thank you. It's very exciting. So yes, if we had the county administrator come up, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I saw your head nodding a number of times, so you were helping follow along and keep us in line. Please introduce yourself for the record and welcome.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Cameron Moore. I am the Clatsop County Manager. And I think to the question from Commissioner Simpson is a great question. You know, one of the things that if you've been to the North Coast, particularly Clatsop County, what you understand is that because of topography and geography and things like tsunami inundation zones and other issues that we have to worry about, we have a very limited amount of property that's available for industrial type development. And so this particular business park is critically important to us. It's really one of the few places that we have where we're going to see any significant industrial type of development. And so we are actively marketing the park. We do that through our economic development group. I think it was referenced earlier. It's called CEDAR, Clatsop Economic Development Resources. County's an active partner, active funder, and also working closely then with our allies at the state and regional level to identify any opportunities, any business opportunities that may work on that particular piece of property. So it's definitely something that's a big part of what we do every day.
Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, good luck. Thank you so much, and thank you for your hard work.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is extremely meaningful, and I appreciate all the support you've given us.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sunny. Next item, we are going to have a discussion with Public Transportation Advisory Committee Chair and Vice Chair. Mr. Guard, I'll turn it over to you.
Chair Boehne, members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Hal Guard. I'm the Administrator of the Rail and Public Transit Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you for having us today. I think everybody on the Commission and actually around the state recognizes that the conversation around public transportation has been evolving. What has traditionally really been viewed as a local problem and a local issue is expanding. And folks recognize that it's as important to move people between transportation districts, to move people between cities, to move people around the state, to move people through the region is just as important. As well as recognizing that our demographics are rapidly changing, that we're looking at an aging population, and that our young people are less interested in getting their driver's license and are more interested in productive public transit trips and the choices to be able to move that way. We're going to talk a little later about our long-range plan that we're developing in concert with TDD, but the Public Transportation Advisory Committee was very interested in trying to provide information resources to inform that broader discussion that's starting to evolve. And so with that, I would like to turn this over to my good chair and my good vice chair to talk a little bit more about the strategic initiatives that PTAC has undertaken over the past year.
Great, thank you.
For the record, I'm Alan Pollack. I'm the chair of the Public Transportation Advisory Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to brief you on this project. I agree, or I believe you'll agree with me at the end of this briefing. In the 8 short months we've been working on this project, we have created some products and processes that will really advance the messaging and the education of public transportation in the state. So with that, this is the agenda we'll be working on today. We'll give you just a quick background on the PTAC to orient us all on the same page, and then we'll talk about some of the products from the Strategic Initiatives Project. So the PTAC was formed back in 2000 by the Commission, and the committee focuses on transit issues of statewide interest. We consist of 21 members, broken into primarily 2 groups, transportation providers as well as affiliated groups. And from the transportation provider section, we are well represented by all sizes of organizations, from the very large in Portland, Salem, and Eugene, to small urban providers, rural providers, tribal transportation representatives, the private side, as well as senior and people with disabilities transportation service providers. And in your packet, it lists all of those as well as the affiliate groups that are a part of the committee. It's a very active committee, and we are really working to ensure we achieve our vision. We also meet about 6 times per year, and it's our goal to have at least 1 meeting per year. We would go and visit one of the regions so that transportation interests in those areas can come and be a bit more involved in the committee. Back in 2014, the committee established a vision and 5 goal areas. You can see them here on the slide. And we use this as the base to really build the Strategic Initiatives Project. So how does that Strategic Initiative Project work in relationship with other planning efforts? So we are informed by one-time efforts such as the Governor's Visioning Panel, as well as the updating process of the Oregon Public Transportation Plan. I think the key here is to note that PTAC's the continuous ongoing committee that spans these efforts, making sure we're incorporating current activities and discussions of today, as well as ensuring what we're doing today moves us towards the long-term vision of the Public Transportation Plan. Really, what can we do now to make a difference committee? As we talk about the Strategic Initiatives Project, we did start this last summer. You can see the project deliverables that we have here. I've asked our vice chair to go a little bit more in depth on some of the products that we've created, but I would add from the pilot project, which we are just now kicking off, we'll be taking a look at our 5311 funding distribution process. 5311 is the formula grants for rural areas, and really looking to ensure we're leveraging the federal funds in the best way to meet the intent, as well as taking a look at the formula to make sure it's still relevant given what's happening today. Kind of like the CMAQ process, as things change, it's time to take a look to how to make sure that the formula works for the current intent. So here's a list of the accomplishments that we have completed since we started the program last summer, and I'll ask our Vice Chair, Jeff Hazen, to brief you on those components.
Hi, for the record, I'm Jeff Hazen. Is that better? There we go. Jeff Hazen, Vice Chair of the Public Transportation Advisory Committee, and also the Executive Director of Sunset Empire Transportation District up in Astoria. As Alan mentioned, PTAC has completed visioning and goal setting back in 2014, and this plan, the strategic work plan, really bounces off of that. And we developed, short-term plan or initiatives, medium-term, and then long-term strategies also. This is the clicker. Before you are the short ones, the short-term ones, And it's important to note that the first three items have already been completed. Even though we just completed the strategy plan, we've already been working hard on getting some of these things done. And so I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. You know, PTAC represents all the transit providers throughout the state, and it's important that we have effective communication throughout all the providers within the state. And so developing protocols is very important to us to open up those lines of communications with the providers. And so we did we interviewed several of the providers throughout the state to find out what the most effective way for us to communicate with them and them to communicate with us is. And it really varied from different agencies. Obviously, large agencies have a lot of staff, but there's several agencies that they have one person and that's it. So those strategies are going to be different with each agency. So we know that we have to have multiple options available for them. So, you know, we put out the agendas for the PTAC meetings ahead of time and notes after the meetings so that people can feel engaged. I personally, when we get those agendas out, I've had some of my constituents that I represent, Western rural providers, get a hold of me to ask questions ahead of time and give their opinions on things, which is perfect. It's very, very effective. We also have the PTAC website, and we keep that updated with the information so the providers can follow along also. And I just went to the wrong thing, I think. Oh, okay. Another key thing was being able to communicate not only to providers but to legislators, to the public, the importance of public transportation throughout Oregon. So we developed a 4-page brochure, and you have that in your packet. And it's public transportation connecting communities, and it talks about the effect that public transportation has, how it's important for mobility, it's a benefit to the economy. But the greatest thing I think in it is it has personal stories about people that use transportation. And really, when you get out and you talk with people about public transportation, it's great to have stories. When I got hired in my job up in Astoria, first thing I did, because I was brand new to transportation and transit, I came from the private sector and retail, I went out and I rode the buses. And I learned more from the riders than anybody else on my staff. Not only the riders, but also the drivers. So having those personal stories are really important. The other thing that I did that I like to share is my first staff meeting with my leadership team. We held it at our transit center conference room, and then one of our buses pulled up our Astoria route, and I said, come on everybody, let's go ride the bus. And we finished our staff meeting on the bus. And what I learned is that most of my staff had never ridden a bus before. And so I was able to demonstrate to them, these are the people that we're serving. It's important that whatever job you have, I don't care what position you have to know why we're in business. So that this brochure is great to hand out to people to share our story. As Alan noted, the strategic initiatives included the pilot project that we're going to be embarking on, looking at that 5311 formula, how it's allocated. I'll be part of that committee and look forward to see how, if we're doing it the right way, if there's other ways that it can be done. We also went through and compared funding throughout several different states throughout the union, and specifically identified Minnesota and Colorado and kind of did a little bit more in-depth study for those two states to see how they do funding, and are there other funding options out there that we can learn from those other states. And you've got the executive summary from that report in your packet, and we can make the full report available if you so desire. The
The other thing, along with the pamphlet that we developed, is a PowerPoint presentation, and we just got to see the first run of it this past Monday at our PTAC meeting. It's another great tool for us to go out and share, again, the benefits of public transportation. Personally, I try to get to the local cities within Clatsop County twice a year and just update them on what's going on in the district and how we're, affecting their residents and constituents in their respective cities. So having this tool is going to be great. And again, it's going to have stories on it, and we're really going to encourage the different transportation providers, if they need to use these stories, great, but if they can develop some of their own local stories, that's even better, because that really resonates with people in their communities. So next steps, we're going to continue to work on the other short-term strategies in the work plan, including a plan to share resources between providers. Again, some of our smaller agencies, especially rural ones, we don't have robust staff, and there may be some needs that we have. Is there a way that we can share some of those responsibilities? I had hired an IT person when I first got hired because we had an immediate need to upgrade our infrastructure within our district. And my neighbor to the south, Tillamook County District, they also were looking to hire somebody. Well, it didn't really make sense that we both had full-time IT person. So we were in the process of developing an IGA to share my IT person, which was going to work out great. And then my IT person decided to move to Alaska. And he's actually working for the state DOT up there now. So, but those are the kind of things that I think are really important, because in public transportation, we're not in competition with each other. We're in collaboration with each other. And so having those tools available to help foster those relationships between agencies, I think will benefit everybody. Another item is to identify best practices for first mile, last mile. That's always talked about throughout the transit world, and what's working for different agencies. And obviously it's going to be different from urban settings to rural settings such as mine, or an extreme rural setting out in eastern Oregon. So we're going to help look at those type of things. Another strategic action is to examine options for better coordination of services and fares to facilitate travel between communities. And we have several good examples, and I, again, like to say that I'm part of one of those, the Northwest Oregon Transit Alliance, which is a group of 5 transit providers: Columbia County, Clatsop County, Tillamook County, Lincoln County, and Benton County. And we work together to provide hopefully seamless transportation between the urban centers in the valley out to the coast and then up and down the coast. And so we're continually working on how we can make those connections better. As a whole, the strategic work plan should be updated annually. We'll constantly be going back and reviewing it and looking for other opportunities to enhance it. And with that, we'll take any questions that you have.
Start by thank you very much for the commitment of time that you put in as well in helping to guide this work. I noted on your membership representation list that we have 4 vacancies that are ODOT appointed. So I'm wondering, and they appear to be important pieces in terms of the partnership aspect, the NEMT and in particular public schools. So are we having challenges in filling those positions, or have we maybe had some folks rotate off?
Chair Boehne, members of the commission, we have had a hard time filling some of those. It's been very difficult to get and retain tribal representatives. We recently lost our EMT representative. We got somebody on board. They immediately rotated out into another job, and we have never been able to get a representative from public schools to participate. So those are ongoing challenges. We're aware of them. We recognize, and we've been before you before, to try to update our membership roster to make sure it properly represents the range of public transportation services in the state. But there are just some areas that are challenging. And we will, believe me, redouble our efforts and do what we can to find some good active participants in those areas.
Excellent. Well, if we can play a role in helping to assist on that, we'd be happy to.
I welcome recommendations of names of enthusiastic participants, but we work our committee members quite hard. I think everybody here will recognize this, so it has to have folks with a high energy level.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that Mr. Pollack and I have been in a number of meetings outside of just this work too. So the commitment that you both put in to make sure that this work is done is greatly appreciated. Do we have questions or other comments? Please.
Again, I too appreciate what you've presented, and it's hard for me, living in Southern Oregon, understanding the need for public transportation and the ridership issues, and yet a lot of what we see is up north. And so I would expect, as you mentioned, Eastern Oregon is very difficult as well, yet the demand and need is probably higher than we even know because we don't get participation. So I think there's got to be a way to bring more people to the table or take the table someplace else and really look at what are the needs for public transportation outside the north. And again, I don't want to belittle anything that you've done because I think you've brought a lot of those issues to light. And sometimes that just brings up more questions and more concerns. So to me, there's still a piece missing. And I'm sure you're aware of that. I'm not bringing anything new. But how do we take that table someplace else to get better input, better information for us to use? And again, thank you. I'm not trying to throw stones at all because I do think you've put a lot of effort. I think the funding options message is very good, very clear, yet still brings up probably more questions and unanswered information that you've brought forward. How do we use that funding? How do we make it better statewide? So again, I really thank you, and I don't mean to be just bringing up more questions, and perhaps Commissioner Lohman being a part of this, and also the Southern Oregon link, you probably have delved into that also, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this before, but again, thank you. It just brings up more questions for me.
Commissioner Brown, if I may, the funding option piece was, I think, the highest priority for the committee when they were looking at elements to look into, because they just needed to understand how did other people pull it off? How did other states really marshal the resources? And our state contribution is very, very low compared to other states. And so folks were just trying to understand, why are we struggling so hard? Why are the resources so very, very limited? And I think, they came away with the study better informed, but also a little frustrated because options weren't readily available to them.
And I think a lot of that, let me just jump in really quickly, because I remember this discussion before. Everybody thinks the rider will pay for that. There's no way. There is no way. It is a subsidized program that all of us need to understand. Why is it subsidized? What's the best benefit? That first and last mile is huge for the people that must rely and should rely, and maybe the rest of us could rely on public transportation. But there is a subsidy to it, and we always think the rider should pay for that. It's not going to happen. So, and again, I appreciate that message too, and thank you very much.
Commissioner Lohman?
Well, I certainly agree with your last comment, Commissioner. I do want to defend PTAC a little bit. In the time that I've been on the commission, PTAC has become extremely active, chaired for many years by your predecessor, Julie Brown, who heads our VTD. And what I've seen happen at PTAC is it has become very active, representing much more than just the metropolitan area. The non-metro areas have become much more collaborative with each other. And some of the things going on are really kind of inspiring. You see what's happening up on the north coast, where there's this collaboration going on throughout that whole part of the state, and look over at northeastern Oregon, where they're pulling together these just little pieces of programs and turning them into a collaborative, functioning system. It's really amazing what they're doing with very, very little resources. So I think PTAC has really stepped up its game in the last 10 years. And I just want to recognize that and encourage you to keep it up.
If I could, Commissioner Loman, Chair Boehne, that is exactly one of the things that we're looking at as part of the strategic initiatives is public transportation telling its story better. The story is out there, but if we know it, that's one thing, but we really need to let the communities know it, because there is a great need out there, but it's under the radar. And if we can tell our story, then we can manage the message better than someone else telling it.
Yeah, and if I could chime in too, Commissioner Brown, you talked about, fares, that, a lot of people think that fares pay for public transportation. And I gave a presentation 6 months ago to the Northwest Area Commission on Transportation about how funding works for public transportation. And I was shocked because nobody in the room understood that fares are just a small component. They had no idea. They thought that fares paid for transportation. So that's the message that we have to get out there.
Okay, one more?
One
comment?
last question.
Yes.
Do you guys have any historical data or information in regards to the median income for just typical riders, public transportation statewide?
Commissioner Simpson, the information is probably there. I don't have it here.
Oh, okay.
If you'd like that, we could provide.
I was just wondering if anybody assessed that at all, just because I'm just curious about just the history of fares and where they are today, and the implication that has on folks that are the most predominant users of public transportation.
Yeah, I would say I think one particular is depending on where they're at too. The demographics of riders are different in the urban area than the rural area, and that makes a difference also.
Commissioner, we'll dig into that and get back to you with what information we can find.
Thanks.
Excellent. Perfect segue into the public transportation plan. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for your commitment of time as well as the presentation today. And more to come. Thank you. Yes. Now we will have an informational presentation on the Oregon Public Transportation Plan, and this tees us up for the opportunity to go out for public comment soon. And it's a check-in for the commission, because these modal plans are an opportunity for us to set those priorities and goals. And thank you to Commissioner Lohman, who has been guiding that work as well. So, Ms. Bohard, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, Commission. For the record, my name is Jerry Bohard. I'm the Transportation Development Division Administrator, and with me, obviously you know Hal, Brooke Jordan is one of our project managers for this effort. I'm just going to set the stage really quickly and turn it over to Brooke, because she's the smart lady in this effort. Just sort of a reminder, the Oregon Transportation Plan, which the Commission approved back in 2006, is really the umbrella document, and we build a number of plans underneath it that just take that vision and that structure just to the next level. Recently, you all did the Safety Action Plan, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, the Transportation Options Plan, so now we're sort of in that stretch with the Public Transportation Plan. I think what's really key about all of these, though, is that we've really changed our process to really look at this as a partnership. So certainly the staff in the planning section under Eric Havig really set that process and making sure we're involving all the right people. And then the partnership we have is with the expertise, so the rail and public transit. So it's a really close partnership and really important thing that we do. We also, just as an FYI within your, and I think Commissioner Brown, the outreach that we also try to do, so you have our policy advisory committee, our technical advisory committee. It's attachment to, I think, the cover memo. You can see the diversity of folks that are involved in that. This effort takes a little over 2 years, so we really appreciate when a commissioner, and it's really important that our commissioner is a chair of this, because it really helps to set the direction and the expectation of the commission as a whole. But because this takes about 2 years to do, there's key points that we want to come back to to the commission and make sure we're sort of heading in the right direction. And this is one of those places. And you're going to hear from Brooke where we have a vision statement, we have goals, a lot of policies, a lot of strategies. But most importantly, we're going to be doing sort of our second part of outreach. So first, when we started this plan, we did a bunch of listening sessions. Now we're going to go out probably in this summer and really go to our area commissions, our metropolitan planning organizations, and sort of go, this direction that we're going, does it make sense to you as well? So we're kind of in that key place. And so that's really the outcome that we're looking for after you hear this presentation, if you're comfortable in the direction that we're taking. So with that, I will turn it over to Brooke.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Brooke Jordan, and as Jerry Bohart said, I'm a transportation planner, and I'm one of the project managers for this plan. We wanted to provide you an overview and an update of the work that we've completed to date. So if you can see on this slide, we're almost halfway through our planning process. We've completed a number of supporting research and background documents to support the plan. We hope to complete and adopt the plan by summer 2018. Next, I just want to provide you an overview of some of the work that we've completed and how it fits together within the plan. Briefly, Chapter 1 includes really an overview of the plan itself and the vision and goals. The vision and goals are important because they really illustrate what we hope to achieve with the plan. Chapter 2 includes an overview of existing conditions, the opportunities, challenges, and trends memo, and the benefits of public transportation or the business case. This really helps us to identify key issues that the plan needs to address. And in Chapter 3 is primarily composed of policies and strategies, and we hope to develop those policies and strategies to directly address those issues raised in Chapter 2. Chapter 4 includes a needs assessment and funding scenarios. I'll provide an overview of the needs assessment later on in this presentation. Finally, Chapter 5, we identify key initiatives for implementation. We identify and define roles and responsibilities for not only ODOT, but other agencies and actors across the state. And then we set out some performance measures so we can track the progress of the plan as we implement it. So now I'll provide an overview and key highlights of the benefits of public transportation. And really one of the key benefits of public transportation is that it connects people to places. It does this by enhancing urban transportation networks. It provides those crucial rural connections. It serves people with fewer transportation options, and it provides those intercity and intra-city connections. It supports economic vitality by providing additional capacity in already congested corridors. It can reduce transportation costs for households, and it can support new development and encourage existing development. It also supports tourism, and it can help residents and visitors alike visit important landmarks across the state. It also improves the health and safety of our residents. It can increase physical activity by people who choose to walk and bike to public transit stops or stations. It reduces air quality and water, it increases air quality and reduces pollution by allowing the state to attain its climate goals. It can contribute to resilient communities and support the health and safety of our residents. So I want to provide a few trends of the existing conditions currently. Oregon is growing. We've added over 1 million residents since the 1990s, and Willamette Valley is expected to grow the most. These trends really drive the need for all forms of transportation, including public transportation. There's evidence of shifting travel preferences and needs across the state. For example, millennials are using transit at a high rate. Older adults are likely to be transit dependent, and minorities and lower income households are also using transit at a high rate. However, this comes as no surprise to many of you. I'm sure transit budgets are strained. There's a need for major maintenance and capital replacement needs. For instance, half of all transit vehicles will need to be replaced in the coming needs in order to meet FTA standards. And because of these needs, providers often focus on maintaining current assets and services as opposed to expanding them. Despite all this, there is increasing use and support of public transportation. 20% of households use public transportation at least once a week, and 80% of Oregonians state that they support public transportation. However, as I mentioned before, funding for maintenance and fleet replacement remains an issue. This has been identified by multiple stakeholders throughout the plan development process. The variability and unreliability of funding sources can also be an issue here, and part of that is attributed to the variance in local funding structures as well. However, there is a great need and interest by both urban and rural providers in providing those crucial intercity services. However, this can be challenging because especially in rural areas, rural providers have less resources in order to expand those services. I want to go over the needs assessment now. The needs assessment is really an important element of this plan. It helps us to better understand the potential gap between needs and potential resources available to providers. It does not present a future investment vision, but instead it will help us to inform our investment scenarios that will be in Chapter 4 of the plan. This is a high-level estimate, and it is expressed by an annual dollar amount required by providers to deliver service to communities across Oregon out to 2045. It's not intended to propose a particular level of transit service, but rather it describes a range of potential investments. The estimated range of need is broken into 3 levels: baseline, reasonable unmet need, and additional unmet need. The baseline need really represents the resources needed to provide the same level of service per capita today into the future. It accounts for population growth out to 2045, and this basically means that more resources are required to provide the same level of service in the future as is provided today. Within this level, many rural and underserviced areas would still lack service. The reasonable unmet need are the resources needed to provide a higher level of service than is currently provided today. This could include things like further expansion of fixed route services and increases to span of service. For example, that would mean services that could run later at night or earlier in the morning. The additional unmet need are the resources that are needed to serve nearly all potential public transportation trips if sufficient service were available. So this was estimated qualitatively according to what the state's public transportation system might look like if this level of need was met. And so that could be something where residents could at least access some level of public transportation service. The table summarizes the results of the need assessments for the current expenditures, baseline need, and reasonable unmet need. It is divided into operations and capital costs, as well as estimated individual person trips. Costs are shown here as an average of annual costs in millions of 2013 dollars, and I would just like to draw your attention to the total need column. Currently, we are spending about $750 million, and then the baseline need indicates that if that level of service were provided, it would be about $1.2 billion, and the reasonable unmet need can be up to $2 billion. And I just want to go back and hit upon the baseline need again is the amount of resources required to provide the same level of service today per capita into the future, into 2045, accounting for population growth. And the reasonable unmet need is to provide that higher level of service. The numbers shown here really represent an estimate that is a snapshot in time. They depict the total resources needed to construct and operate the public transportation system at each level of that service that I described, regardless of funding levels. It should also be noted that there are several other needs assessments that are currently being developed or have been developed by other groups. For instance, ODOT's Rail and Public Transit Division, the Oregon Transit Association, and the Public Transportation Advisory Committee. The OPTP needs assessment is different from these efforts in that it is a high-level estimate. It does not set priorities for future investment. It does not prescribe a level of service for any one area across the state. It simply provides this high-level estimate of need for the state, and it was developed for the explicit purpose of informing the investment scenarios for this plan. And these investment scenarios for the plan will present a more detailed look at what types of level of services you can get at various levels of investment. I'd like to go over the vision and goals for the plan. The OPTP envisions that in 2045, the public transportation system is really an interconnected and integral part of the transportation system. It's convenient, affordable, and efficient. It supports the quality of life of all of our residents. And as you can see, the 10 goal areas presented here are very similar to our statewide plans. I would like to draw your attention to 2 goal areas, mobility and accessibility and connectivity. The PAC decided to tailor the goal names to be a bit more clear and communicate the types of goals, policies, and strategies associated with them. Several key issues have emerged during the planning development of this plan. I'd like to provide a high-level overview of those. The built environment refers to issues around integrating land use and public transportation planning so that riders can more easily access those important destinations like jobs, housing, schools, and medical appointments. In rural areas especially, it can be very difficult to serve communities that are more dispersed and dispersed across larger distances. Other issues around the built environment include those first and last mile issues and safe access to public transportation by pedestrians and cyclists. Intercity is another important issue that's been raised by many of our stakeholders. There is really a need to increase the connectivity between cities in Oregon and sometimes even across state boundaries. There's a need for not only expanding existing services, but also adding new services. And many of our stakeholders have indicated that there's a real barrier in providing these inner city services because they cannot operate in other jurisdictions in many cases. Education and outreach is another issue. There is really a lack of widespread knowledge of the public transportation system and even how to use the system. Using the system can be difficult and confusing for some riders, especially if a rider needs to transfer to a different system, has a disability, or doesn't have access to a smartphone. Equity is another key issue. This is really similar to some of the issues that people have around accessing information. People with lower incomes, older adults, and disabilities have challenge accessing and using the system. For example, a person with a disability can become stranded far from home if a lift is inoperable on a bus. Culture of public transportation was also identified. Many people feel unsafe utilizing the public transportation system and therefore don't ride. So there's a real opportunity here for this plan to help foster a culture of public transportation and attract new riders. Finally, there have been issues raised around communication, collaboration, and coordination. The folks from PTAC also just mentioned that issue as well. There are many opportunities for this plan to address those issues, especially around coordinating between different providers to support greater intercity connectivity, working with human service providers to get folks to medical trips and other services, and even sharing data and information across agencies. There's also an emerging opportunity for the state to help facilitate those connections. In the summer of 2016, the project team conducted a series of listening meetings that Jerry mentioned earlier as well. We went to every region across the state. And as you can see from the themes we've listed here, many of the issues that were raised by stakeholders are the ones that we've identified and the key issues so far. There's a real need for more agency collaboration and coordination, especially around intercity connectivity. There's a need to build that stronger culture of transit. There's also a need for more consistent and stable funding as well. So next steps for this planning process, we're wrapping up policy development currently and Chapter 1 as well. We also just completed a series of 3 rider focus groups, and we'll be summarizing that information and delivering it to the PAC as well. Next up, we're going to complete the policy development and refinement. The PAC will be able to look at all of the policies developed in their entirety and provide us feedback on that before we go out to public outreach in the summer. So this summer we'll be going out to the public, we'll be visiting different agencies and organizations and asking for feedback on the draft policies and strategies which make up the majority of Chapter 3. And then we'll also be refining that chapter as well. And after we go out for that public outreach, we'll bring the results and summary back to the PAC as well so that they can provide input on what we heard. Thank you for your time. I am now available to answer any questions that you may have.
It's a lot of information. Well done. Thank you. Do we have questions for Ms. Jordan? The one with all of the plans, the connection between the bike ped plan as well. Obviously, that connection is important in terms of the utility of both of those. Do you mind going over how this plan merges in as well?
Sure. So, Chair Boehne, you're aware of this website that we developed. It's called the OR Plan. It's a tool that houses all of the policies and strategies across all of our plans so that we can better show where the plans align, support each other, and where they diverge. So it gives a greater amount of context around them. So that would be a good tool to use to illustrate where the Oregon Public Transportation meets plans like the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan and the Transportation Options Plan. We also try to write our plans in such a way and develop the policies so that they meet on similar issues where there's overlap and support each other but aren't redundant, so that we're not copying and adding the same policy from the Transportation Options Plan in the OPTP.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please.
I guess I'd just like to make a few comments as I've watched the plan develop. First of all, this is a very difficult area. It's a very challenging area, particularly to think ahead 20 years or longer, which is what this plan is supposed to do. It's partly challenging because there are so many different players and types of players involved in this. It's not just an ODOT deal. You've got the various transit providers themselves, which can be from the very big TriMet to the very small, and they're funded in different ways. Some of them from property tax, some of them from payroll tax, some of them from lawnmower fuel tax. I mean, it is just pungling these things together. You've got DHS that provides some funding for getting folks around. Veterans VA provides some funding for some kinds of transit. The tribes are doing some of that. And then there's the private sector that has a role to play, and probably an increasing role to play. And figuring out how to coordinate all of that and make sense of it is a real challenge for this planning process. And then you've got the fact that there really isn't any stable funding for this, except for the limited amount we get from the federal government. Even though this is an area where more funding for transit would enable us to spend ultimately less money on our highways. But we're not able to make that trade-off because we don't have stable funding for transit. And then finally, the technology issues are just kind of overwhelming the whole planning process because there's so much happening so fast. And that makes it very difficult. I just wanted to, one of the white papers that was done, I can't remember whether it was CH2ML did this or Parsons Brinkerhoff. They did a white paper that's helping us, sort of informing us as to what we need to be thinking about. And this is on the transit technology paper. And one of the points is, I'm just going to read a little bit, I hope you'll indulge me. Improved coordination among public and private transportation providers could yield benefits in terms of facilitating seamless connections between modes and improving user experience. New technologies like mobile apps are now making these connections between public and private transportation services easier. But there are potential issues associated with coordination and collaboration between the public and private providers. Similarly, a later point in this white paper, pilot projects represent an opportunity to try new technologies and ascertain their benefits and drawbacks. Funding for technical support for pilot projects fosters technological development and supports adoption of beneficial technology statewide. And that's what I think we're going to end up with when we get down to the end of this process and we're talking about key initiatives. At least I'm going to be one suggesting that we need to get involved in some pilot projects that really does try to figure out how to coordinate better between the public providers themselves, but also between the public providers and the private side. And that's going to take some, I guess, some risk-taking on some pilot projects and demonstration projects. There are folks around the country doing some of these, and I think we need to be participating in similar kinds of projects so that we understand how that collaboration can work in our context. I know the department is doing some things already. I know that Hal has helped get in place this remix system, which is I can't explain it really, but it's online public transportation planning software that they're making available to all the transit providers in the state, and it's a way of fostering that kind of collaboration and ultimately bringing in the private sector, collaborating with them too. So it's an important step, and we need to be doing more of that. I guess the final thing I would say, maybe responding to Commissioner Brown's earlier comment about making sure we're not just thinking about TriMet. This group, the Policy Advisory Committee for Public Transportation, really has representation from all the people, all those different players that I ticked off to begin with. I think it's, and we're constantly being reminded by somebody or other that, hey, don't forget about me. And that's a very valuable part of this effort.
It is a large table of individuals, and I think making sure that people feel that they're heard and their voice is incorporated in this work is critical to the outcome and success. So thank you. Do we have other comments? Do we feel like we're on track with this? It's really a check-in point of if we need to course correct or there's something that feels like it's missing. Now is the opportunity for us to give that direction and guidance. Okay, please, Commissioner.
As I listen to this and I think of the travels that I've done, the two notes I wrote down is, where do you feel we are with transit and public transportation with respect to the overall priorities for ODOT? And I don't need an answer. I think we need to look at, it's all about priorities and choices. We don't have the money to do everything, at least not today. We might in the future, that'd be nice. And then when I travel in foreign countries, other states, whatever, why does it work in some places and what's missing for us? And maybe it comes back to my first question of priorities and choices. So I don't have answers for that. Those are just thoughts I wrote down as we develop these plans and continue to look at them, because it's not easy. You look at it, and as a planner, and I very much respect planners, even though I'm an engineer, so it's okay. Planners have the ability to dream and look at the possible. And sometimes you have engineers that come shut it down because of the impossible and funding and so on, or something else is more important. But I do respect the planning tools that we have and the brains of our planners to be able to say, here's what we could do. And don't forget to continue to dream big as to some of those possibilities, because there are foreign countries that do a phenomenal job. Perhaps it is because they've outgrown everything else. And I don't know that we want to get to that point where we've outgrown everything and have to rely on some things, but maybe we need to plan for that. But I do appreciate where you are and what you've done and the inclusion of all communities in Oregon. So thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Brown, just your point, so well taken, because the last plan that we did really focused on what was our role as an agency, which was pretty limited, from a rural provider, some inner city work. The framework of this plan is completely different. It's around what is the role of public transportation relative to the transportation system. So the complexity that Commissioner Lohman talked about was really taken to that next level, because we really directed this plan completely differently than what we did in '96. In fact, our large urban providers, they kind of said, do your planning, that's great, we do our planning. Pal and I went out in particular and worked with the large urban planners and said, this public transportation plan isn't going to work unless we're all in this together. And they go, we agree wholeheartedly. We have to think about public transportation as seamless. We're all providers. Folks want to get from point A to point Z, and they have been very engaged in this process. So it will mean that I think that the role that our public transportation folks will look different in the future. But again, we really did turn this whole plan for public transportation on its head, let alone who knows what technology is going to do. So.
There's one other thought that comes to mind. I've been involved in a number of these other modal plans. This one, much more than any of the others, I think is going to be quickly outdated just because of the technology. And I think at the end of this process, we're probably going to come back as a policy advisory committee and say to this commission, you're probably going to need to look at this again in 5 years. You can't wait 10 years or 15 years. It's just changing so quickly. And we're going to have to figure out our role once again. Hopefully, along the way, somehow, some additional funding will become available, so this can be an option. I mean, as years ago, the legislature said, we want you to start doing least cost planning so you make the best choices. Well, that's fine, but if you don't have funds to implement the least cost choice, I mean, all the planning in the world doesn't help you. And somehow we've got to get stable funding for public transportation, or we're not going to have a balanced transportation system, and it's going to be, our essential option is going to be rely on more asphalt. And we just can't afford that from many standpoints.
Yeah. So we do have public comment as well, so I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation, and I'd like to ask Mr. Charles to come up and join us. Please.
Is it on now? Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is John Charles, President of Cascade Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research organization. Over my 40-year career, I've probably been to hundreds of meetings where public transit has been discussed. And the starting point is almost always, the philosophical starting point echoes what you've talked about today, which is, if you look at attachment 5, when your report here has the chart showing that fares in 2014 for transit comprised about 16.6% of revenue. So people tend to leap to the conclusion that users couldn't possibly pay even half the cost, let alone the full cost of operations, and none of the capital cost. And then you proceed to have a conversation as if transit is some kind of welfare program. I'd like you to consider the possibility that that is wrong. Now, I'm a lifelong transit user, and whenever I come down to Salem, as I did today, I never drive anymore. If I'm doing business on the mall here, no, I take TriMet's West commuter rail from Beaverton to Wilsonville, where I get 2 comfortable seats to myself, and then I get off, walk 100 yards at Wilsonville, and get on a bus run either by SMART of Wilsonville or Chariots of Kaiser Salem. Get on, I had 2 comfortable seats to myself today, take a nap, read, do some email, get dropped off about 50 feet from the door here. Total out-of-pocket cost for me today after I do the round trip, well, to my organization, would be $11. If I drove down and paid for the really expensive parking that Salem imposes, out-of-pocket cost would be probably $55 or more. Now, I work for a nonprofit. Every dollar we spend has to be raised by asking for it from donors. So travel costs are a really big issue for me as the CEO. And that's one reason why I take transit. The other is it's wear and tear on my psyche to have to stare at the road and do the drive all over and over and over again when I'd rather sit on a bus and do something else. So I've said many times, publicly and private, to the service providers, excuse me, including the TriMet board, I said, you're just giving it away. Do you have a self-esteem problem? You really think your service is so bad you're afraid to ask me to pay? You could double the rate. I would still take transit. You could triple the rate. My comparison is what? $55 I have to reimburse, and we don't even pay the IRS rate. We reimburse employees 50 cents on the mile. I think the 2017 IRS rate is about 54 cents. If you're paying the full IRS rate to employees for their personal car use plus the parking, that's the benchmark. Most people on the bus coming down here are white-collar workers. They're getting off and working in one of these buildings here. They're getting paid, I'm sure, a decent wage. Same calculation applies. I don't understand why transit providers think they're in the welfare business. It's a commodity. The question was asked, what do we know about transit users? I don't know statewide, but TriMet knows a lot about their users. They do a survey all the time. Last time I checked, I believe it was 84% of their riders are what they call choice riders. They have enough money to own and operate at least one car. Okay, why do you think they can't pay more than the fare box recovery ratios for operations at TriMet hovers year to year around 25% of operations, zero for capital, and their capital construction program is huge. They're just giving it away, and most of their people have the same comparison: car, transit, car, transit. This is not just a philosophical discussion, although I'm bringing it to your attention because you are the policy setting board, and no one below you is going to volunteer in the transit world to suggest that users should pay more. They love the fact that the conventional wisdom is we need all these third-party subsidies. Well, it's not just a philosophical discussion. There is a direct connection between the availability of third-party subsidies and compensation they have to pay to employees. This is a very big issue at TriMet, which for years has had probably the richest benefits package of any employer in the entire country, certainly in their own industry. Over the last decade, at least for the last 10 years, every year when you check their audit, they pay far more in employee benefits than wages. That's shocking. Where else does that happen? Actually, nowhere that I know of. I think the past year, the ratio to benefits to wages was about 119%, and that was a good year. It's been worse before. So that wouldn't work. I'd be fired in a minute if I tried that. Okay. Well, but everybody who works for me knows when they are asking to be compensated, all the money comes in is coming in from donors. There's not a magic money tree. Well, at TriMet, they have the payroll tax. And they've been authorized by the legislature to raise the payroll tax rate about 12 times in the last 14 years, and they're going to raise it 8 more times as well in the next 8 years, because the legislature is the great enabler. They say yes, brings in about, for this year, probably $300 million on the operations side, and the ATU, when they go to the table, they know there is no discipline imposed on the conversation. Users and passenger fares are irrelevant to the conversation. There's this thing called the payroll tax out there. Santa Claus's money just washes in. They ask for the moon, and they get it. And so now they have a massive problem with unfunded pension liability, unfunded OPEB liability, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a connection. Same on the capital side. If users were expected to pay something more than 0% of capital, TriMet would never engage in these Taj Mahal construction projects, light rail. All their rail programs would go away instantly, as they should. So there is a connection there, and I would say to you and to all of your clients out there in the public transit world, you should just have to tell them flat out, look, if you can't get at least 51% of operations costs out of users, don't even talk to us. You apparently have a service that no one even cares about. Maybe it should just be euthanized. Or you should ask, okay, what's the subsidy per trip? Is there some level where it's too big even for you to endorse? If you ask them, there's no subsidy. No level is too big because they're doing virtuous work. Well, they are doing virtuous work. and, I enjoy it. But if you don't ask me to pay, I probably won't pay. If you ask me to pay more and the service is valuable, I'll pay more. Why don't you try that? So I'll just close by reminding you that 10 years ago, companies called Uber and Lyft didn't exist. They do now, and they get more than 100% fare box recovery because they get a profit. And they're booming. They're multi-billion-dollar enterprises. I think you should really, the message you should send out as this plan launches is to tell people in the business, public transit business, that to start thinking a lot more like entrepreneurs and not as monopolistic service providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Message received, and I'm sure that is a point of conversation for the committee as well. Okay, so any further comments on this particular item? All right. We will move on to item G. We're going to have a discussion on the proposed strategies to improve the seismic resilience of ODOT, our lifeline routes in Southern Oregon. We'll make sure that our commissioners here are safe and the call out. And then also transportation facilities in Western Oregon. So, Mr. Mather, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Paul Mather, Highway Division Administrator, with the long and waited for, much anticipated briefing on seismic resilience and triage strategy. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the program. Frank Reading from Region 3, who's been working with local communities in Southern Oregon, kind of blazing the trail for us down there on this approach, is going to describe to you some of the work that they've been doing down there. So I'll start with just one slide out of our Seismic Plus program. This is a presentation I think I've given to the Commission and others for some time. It was a report that was published back in 2014. We've given this presentation in some form to every act around the state and given feedback. And in general, we get pretty much the same remarks that we got from you and from others. That good plan, nice approach, maybe a tweak or here or there with it, but boy, that number, that $5 billion and the length of time it's going to take you to get from your phase one, starting with 97 and getting over to some of the key areas on the coast, we've got to find a way to approach this differently in a way to reach those critical communities and some of our needs that we have. So we've been working on this triage approach, and as I said, Southern Oregon is kind of leading the way with this. Frank's going to give you a brief on that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the thoughts we have on some coastal forward supplies and having some supplies kind of in the inundation zone and be ready to respond, and then some of the latest stuff and really some late breaking stuff just from late last week that I got that I just kind of stuck in here to give you some appreciation for the work that we're doing with Tillamook County and with Lane County. So Frank, I'll turn it over to you and you can talk about what you've been doing in Southern Oregon.
Thank you, Paul. Madam Chair, Commissioners, for the record, Frank Reading, Southwest Regional Manager. So the work that we did focused on providing that triage, minimal level of access into Southern Oregon, primarily in the Rogue Valley area. We actually use the Seismic Plus plan as a kind of a starting point. We focused our efforts from Interstate 5, its connection with Highway 58, down to the Southern Oregon border. We also added, as you can see, Highway 140 into that mix. The Seismic Plus work, right now we've got funding for all of 97, so a connection there from Rogue Valley makes a lot of sense to get you in and out of that area. So what did we do? We actually pulled together a team of the best and the brightest. We've got bridge engineers, designers from technical services, geotechnical engineers, some regional staff, and we took a look at all the structures along these two routes in addition to all the unstable slopes. That's something you've got to take into consideration as well. The land moves during Cascadia level events significantly, so we've got to take a look at those as well. So for the work that the bridge folks did, they actually run all the structures through an analytical program. I can't tell you exactly what it does, but it sorts the bridges, the structures into different categories of damage, ranging from minor damage to collapse. And I can tell you that the work they were doing is actually consistent with a group that was formed in 2015 called the Western States Seismic Design Criteria Group. This is a group of state bridge engineers, seismic engineers from California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, as well as the FHWA seismic engineer that's trying to put together consistent design criteria for dealing with lifeline routes and Cascadia level events. So our work was consistent with that. For the landslide work, you're sorting into different categories. You're basically looking at critical and non-critical. Non-critical being a landslide that would take a lane or so, but you could open it up pretty quick. Critical being a landslide that would take lane or multiple lanes and you just couldn't get it opened up rapidly. You don't have a decent detour for 60 miles or more, and those were the critical ones. I guess just for some quick numbers for you, looking at the interstate and Highway and 140, there's about 400 structures out there. That's bridges and box culverts, things of that nature. About 97 of those, 25%, would receive some level of damage in a Cascadia, which to me, I thought, well, that's not as bad as I thought. I'll be honest with you, out of 400. For the unstable slopes, we were looking at about 140 unstable slopes. And there again, I thought we had good information, good news, because about 7 of those slopes would be critical in nature, that we wouldn't be able to get cleared quickly. So now we've got all this information. What are we going to do with it? We actually sorted it into triage categories. So triage category 1 is actually extensively damaged structures or unstable slopes, but there's a good way around it. There's a detour. You can get around these. You can get those emergency services, any commerce that still needs to move through these areas. And what was really important was that we engaged with the local jurisdictions, those county roadmasters, those cities, to make sure the detour routes that we identified were feasible. Could they really work in this type of a situation? And so we had that great level of engagement there. We also wanted to see if there were structures on those routes. Did we have to do something with those in advance? So we've got at least one of those situations where we recommend funding one of their structures. Category 2 was actually extensively damaged bridges on stable slopes. There's just no way around it. You've got to do something up front to be able to not have that brick wall that you're going to come up against after a Cascadia level. And I think, again, reasonably good news is 17 bridges, structures, is what was moved into that category, and a total of 7 unstable slopes for the entire area we're talking about. Now, I think that actually surprised a number of us. The last category, these are relatively minor damaged structures or small landslides that we can clean up pretty quick. Not that big of a deal to us. We weren't too concerned with those. So now we've got all the information, and as you can imagine, our focus was on triage category 2. Those are the ones we've got to take care of. We want to have this triage level access in and out of the Rogue Valley area. What's it going to cost? So then we did the numbers, and we found out that there'd be about a $35 million cost to go in advance and take care of these structures, these slopes, to shore them up to be ready post Cascadia, so we could have a triage level access through that part of the state. We took it one step further. Then we also said, well, $35 million, that seems reasonable, but it just still doesn't fall from the sky. What could we do to maybe break that up into phases? So then we looked at strategically investing in 140. Let's do that first. That could get emergency services in and out of that Southern Oregon area. Took a look at what it would take to actually take care of the bridges and slopes there. It'd be about $5 million. That's a little bit more palatable. That's phase 1. Phase 2, we looked at Interstate 5. Well, if we start about mile point 30 at North Medford Interchange and work our way to the north, the connection with Highway 58, we can get rid of all the rest of finish the rest of the bridges. We can get all those shored up. We can do that for about $20 million. And then lastly, we could come in phase 3 and take care of the remaining, there's only slides remaining in the Siskiyous area from mile 30 to the Southern Oregon border for about $10 million. So that's your total $35 million. We can take it in a phased approach and to make it more palatable. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that this has been discussed, shared with the Rogue Valley Area Commission on Transportation, TRADCO, the transportation advocacy group down there, and this is their #1 priority. So they're totally on board, and they believe this is the right thing to do for Southern Oregon. So That's the end of my presentation. If you'd like, we can wait, Madam Chair, until the end for questions.
Yeah,
That'd
let
be
me
great. Yep.
Cover
Thank
a
you.
couple more points, and I think it'll help illustrate some of the things that Frank's talking about. Before I get back to that, I just want to share with you some thoughts we have on the coast. Obviously, one of the comments we would get from people living on the coast was, what about us? And just with the enormity of the cost and the impacts to deal with those, our approach is a little bit different there. And kind of modeling after what's recommended for each one of us at home is to have kind of a go kit or supply kits at home. What if we carried that same concept to our maintenance stations and armed them with, or supplied them with a series of road building supplies that we know we're going to need, whether it's our forces or county forces or contractors, but we know we're going to need fuel, we're going to need extra culverts, we're going to need water and supplies for our folks. So what if we oversized or kind of supersized our maintenance stations? First, get them out of the inundation zone. So the three that I've highlighted there on the map are ones that need to be replaced. They're in an inundation zone, so let's pull those out of the inundation zone and then make them larger and have a cache of supplies on hand already in the inundation zone that we can use to help get services back moving again. So that concept probably is in the $50–60 million range to do those three sites. Again, not only do we have to replace aging facilities there, but we'd want to make them large enough to accommodate this type of cache of supplies. The final thing that I'll go into is just our work with local agencies. So following the lead that Frank just described, we've started an effort to go county by county in Western Oregon to have that same conversation. So looking at those routes that you have up there, we've got the I-5 Southern Oregon one that Frank talked about, but how about those ones to the coast, the remaining of the phase 1 routes, or really just any one of our routes. A good example I use to illustrate this is right here in Salem. Just down the street from us is the bridges over the Willamette. If you're in Salem, particularly in West Salem, and you want to get to the hospital after this event, you've got to cross that bridge. That bridge is our bridge, and it's in phase 4 of our overall statewide strategy, which from a statewide strategy makes complete sense. But from a community of Salem standpoint, that is a critical structure. So what we've been started on is an engagement with local communities and identifying those kind of key bridges that we would potentially take out of cycle, but then also engage in the process Frank described. How can we look at some of our other phases and maybe find a triaged way to get around? So it's not the ideal way, like Frank described, to get to Medford. It may take you a couple days to get to Medford, but you can get to Medford, and you have a route to get there. So what I've got here is just a couple slides from last Thursday. We've sat down with Tillamook County back in December and kind of laid this expectation out to them and said, help us with this. We're not sure exactly what this looks like for your county, but let's get the city, the county, and us around the table. We got a lot of experts around seismic. We know what bridges, how they're going to behave, but you know your local routes. How can we work together? And we came up with two objectives that we wanted to do. First is we wanted the county to go through a similar exercise. What are your priority routes, lifeline routes, and how do they build off of our network? And then item 2 was this process Frank described. Let's go through our routes and find ways to use your bridges, our bridges, to potentially find a triage route to save some funds. So the next year I got a series of maps. They're kind of crude, and in that you're seeing work that's kind of live in draft form. That's not the final report, but I thought it would be illustrated for you to see what this is. So this is a section of 101 south of Tillamook. If you follow our plan and these bridges in this section, it cost us $11 million, and the county said, look, if you go over here on this blue route over here, we actually can get you around those two $11 million bridges and cost you nothing. Similarly, just south of Tillamook is another section where our estimate on ours is another $10 million, almost 11. And they said, hey, for a few $100,000, again, we can get you around those and provide you access. This next slide is north of Tillamook. On the ODOT routes, it was $14 million. On the county routes, just over $3 million. So good examples of just this kind of triage concept. While you may not have the best route to get around, you have a route to get around. The one piece I don't have a slide for, but they pointed out was our lifeline route goes to the coast and then up 101 to Tillamook. In the north part of their county, they've got a network of roads and their priorities, but they rely on one of our bridges to get across the Miami River, and they would want us to kind of skip out of order of our priorities and help them with that bridge to help build that network for them in the northern part of the county. So it's just kind of trade-off and kind of thinking through this, I think, is kind of exciting to see ways to really kind of bring this to life in communities. And as Frank was describing, get this down to some affordable bite-sized pieces that when funding does come available, whether it's through some federal funds or through a funding package or whatever, we know what our priorities are and we know where we would put those funds for the maximum efforts. So here's just a summary of the 3 ones that I went through, but you can see some pretty substantial savings just in those. We have a similar pilot going on in Lane County, going through the same process. Once we get those done, we'll branch out and start working with all the counties in Western Oregon to engage a similar effort in that. So just a summary of our overall triage program that we have. Frank described the Southern Oregon one. You see the 3 sites on there that we've identified as a starting point for some coastal forward supplies, and then the work I described that we're doing with the counties. So just kind of quickly walking through our approach. I think there's some exciting information. I'll be able to come back with you when we complete our work with the counties to give you a fuller picture of kind of what a triage approach would look like.
Well, let me start by saying that I think this is exactly the direction that we need to be going. When we look at those lifelines, we're all representing the same people. We're trying to provide life safety and responsiveness to the traveling public and to people in general. So however we get that done, I think is how we should be viewing it versus your system, my system, their system. They're our people, and it is a system that we need to make sure complements in terms of that life safety and that responsiveness. So the examples that you used, I'm actually glad, as you mentioned, that last month we weren't able to get this presentation in, and this month we have something as great as that partnership, being able to look and see what, by looking at our system as a whole versus your system and my system, we're able to look at it in a way that meets the needs that we're trying to achieve. So. Anyway, other comments? Yes, Commissioner.
Great work, and I think it's telling that even in the last 2 weeks, my route in Portland has twice had to be deviated on Skyline Boulevard and Burnside due to landslides. And I think they were caused by just torrential downpours, rain, and how do we decipher between where there's water risk and where there's earthquake risk? And obviously it's a real problem, and the corridors get cramped up pretty quickly, and driven these roads 1,000 times, you never think of it being vulnerable to a landslide, and I think there's been 3 in the last couple of weeks. So I think the question is there a way to decipher water risk from earthquake risk? When in a kind of assessing sites, or are we looking at that?
From a landslide standpoint, by and large, we know where our major landslides are. I think the ones you're describing are seeing, in fact, the majority of the ones that we've seen even in our system. Boy, we had one last night on 101. We had another one last night on the Oklahoma River Highway. Are relatively small. They're what Frank was describing as ones within a day or two we could get out there with a piece of equipment and get the roadway back open again. And while they may disrupt the commute for a day or two, they're not the type that we're worried about from a seismic standpoint that are going to cut a lifeline off for weeks or months. And those are the ones really we're focused on, are those major ones that are just going to take the roadway completely out, and we don't have a road that we can just kick a rock or two off and get back going again, type of thing. So those are the areas we're focused on. These more minor ones, the big scheme of things, are kind of more of a nuisance than really anything to really worry about from a life safety or a planning standpoint.
Please.
I guess I want to just describe how this got to be important to me. Out of the planning work that was done on the Seismic Plus plan, several people, including Stuart Foster, particularly down in the Medford area, pointed out that if we did have that plan said that if we did have a a magnitude 9 earthquake, that there would be three interstate bridges between Eugene and Medford that would very likely go down. And doing the work to upgrade those bridges so that they wouldn't go down would be extremely costly and contribute to that $500 million figure that you described as the Seismic Plus program.
$5 billion.
Excuse me, $5 billion.
Yeah.
Because it was so costly, some choices had to be made, and you divided the Seismic Plus program into phases. Well, the first phase is making sure Highway 97 is available, and connections from Highway 97 over into the Willamette Valley would work, and then up the Willamette Valley up to the Portland area. So that was phase one. And so down in Southern Oregon, we're looking at that and saying, well, where is Southern Oregon? Where are those three bridges? They're, I think, in phase 3, which means we might get to them in 15 years or 20 years or something like that. And we realized out of that planning effort that if there were a magnitude 9 earthquake, people in the Rogue Valley wouldn't be able to get north on I-5. Highway 140 would be blocked. We wouldn't be able to get east. We could not get south because the bridges in California are not protected well enough to allow passage after a magnitude 9 earthquake. And of course, going west doesn't work because that's where the seismic damage is going to be the greatest. So they were talking about us in the Rogue Valley, several 100,000 people, not nearly as big as the metro area, but still a significant portion of the state, being isolated from medical supplies, food, just ability to get out for months. And that's just not acceptable. So Frank and folks started thinking, well, how can we be more creative and not just think in terms of that Seismic Plus plan, but also what can we do thinking as a system, that is not just the state system, but the local system too. Are there things we can do to begin to work together, not to create the perfect solution, but an adequate solution, at least for a short term. And that's where they came up with this idea. And I think it's really great that you can look at a number that when we were looking at Seismic Plus would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We can do something meaningful for $35 million and replicate that kind of creative thinking across the state. So I'm really think that ODOT should be, and the communities involved should be really proud of the work that they've done here to figure out a workaround for a really huge problem.
Yes, Frank, kudos to putting that together and making sure that that connection's happening and all those partnerships. So it really is a great opportunity, and it's achievable. It doesn't seem so overwhelming that we can't get there. Right. Do we have other questions or comments? Yep, please.
Just wanted to add to, you got a local solution, community solution, an ODOT solution, and my life's been doing crisis planning. One of the things, Frank, you and I chatted a little bit about is when we look at emergency planning, you've got FEMA that you can get involved and do tabletop exercises to include the what ifs and what additional help or support that they may be able to provide. So I wouldn't just limit it to ODOT. We all plan with our blinders on, and that's so common that everyone does it. But if you open it up just a little bit more, I think that aperture of including FEMA, all the Office of Emergency Management, and see what would they think of, and maybe we could add on to that. Because if it did happen tomorrow, we don't have any of this done. And you guys did a fabulous job, and I love this, and I love breaking it down. But if it happened tomorrow, we'd have to be talking to those agencies anyway. So it may just be something to look into.
And Commissioner Brown, I actually took our conversation, from that conversation, I actually have staff working on setting something up now. So
And I would imagine each of the communities, they're doing their tabletop exercises and those relationships are being established. I think this is just one more opportunity for us to partner and make sure that there's alignment too. So more work to be done. Great, thank you very much. Next, we will have the annual evaluation for the 2016 Oregon Traffic Safety Performance Plan. Mr. Costales, great to see you. And then you also have another item, which is going to be the proclamation around Transportation Safety Awareness Month. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, my name is Troy Costales, Administrator of the Safety Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Nice to meet you, Commissioner Brown. Haven't had a chance to interact with you yet. Two items this morning for you. One is asking for your acceptance of the 2016 annual report that we submit to the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we do this every year. This is the culmination of 18 months ago when we were before you in June and asked for approval for the year's highway safety plan, performance plan, and the projects, the spending that we would go forward with under the U.S. DOT various funding sources. We run those programs for a year, and we bring together within 90 days all of the activities and actions and how those funds were used, and then put it here. So we put a report out to say this is what we did with the funds, here's who received the funds, what was achieved, and match it against our visions and goals that we have to move the state of Oregon forward in terms of highway safety. As mentioned, when we ask for your approval, typically in June, this document also includes some of the state funds that the legislature has obligated, funds that you have obligated, programs the director has given to the division. This is as all-encompassing related to some of the safety work as we can get. It isn't just related to the NHTSA funded programs. There's more to it in here. And so would ask for your acceptance on that. As part of that, I thought I would take a moment to walk through a couple of the program areas that are within this particular document. First, in relationship to impaired driving, and the second related to pedestrians. In the document, the impaired driving chapters start on page 67, and the pedestrian chapters in page 101. The backdrop of this annual plan, and something that you've seen once or twice before, is that these last 2 years, the fatality count in Oregon has gone up, and it's erased decades worth of improvement. Those 10 years from 2004 to 2013, dramatic decline, one of the leading states in the country related to the decline in fatalities, and we've seen our fatalities go up, as has the rest of the country, and we're now starting to hear reports, as has the rest of the world. The last 2 years, fatalities in the transportation network system globally have all started to go up. So we know we've got something in front of us, a challenge that we need to face. And this report helps us turn around and start to peel out what do we need to do different. And our effort really this last 18 months or so is to back up and say, let's get back to the basics. We may have had some programs that have gotten so fine and so particular that we need to come back to the roots of what we need in a highway safety program to try and affect the core change, because almost all of our highway safety performance measures this last 18 months have been going, for the most part, the wrong way. In the area of impaired driving, three quick pieces. One related to the Oregon law. The second is related to all the partners that are involved in the impaired driving countermeasure system in Oregon. And last, just a piece of data to share with you that we have that comes out of this report. Oregon's law that defines impaired driving is one of the most narrow in the country. To be charged with DUI in Oregon, the substance that you would have on board is intoxicating liquor, a controlled substance as based on the schedules of substances, and then a list of about 70 inhalants that the legislature has put into statute. If somebody is under the influence of something beyond that, they are not charged with impaired driving. They could get reckless or careless as a potential charge. One piece, though, that happens is that individual may have a substance abuse issue, and they're not going to touch with the health system to see if we're ever to help them become clean and sober, because they don't get that treatment and evaluation if they're not underneath the definition of the Oregon DUI law, if they get charged with something that is more of a reckless or careless. An astute prosecutor would raise it, and a judge that is aware of what's going on might add that as an aside, but it is not part of the process. The legislature for the last decade has talked about Oregon's law, and there is a bill this session that would expand the definition to be a broader set of substances that do exist on our roads and streets. Impaired driving is very complex. It is one of the few crimes in the area of traffic safety, and all of these partners are important in the process. In the very middle of all of this is the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUII. We did have an opportunity for them to be with you, but due to the storms earlier this year, to talk about marijuana in particular as one of those substances. We are looking forward to that conversation to bring them with you, as well as the Motorcycle Safety Committee and the Traffic Safety Commission, all together to talk about that subject, to learn a little bit more about how all these players touch in relationship to the impaired driving countermeasure system. We're very fortunate to have the Governor's DUI Committee, one of the few states in the country that has that committee, and there is representation from every one of those spots around the table that meet every month to talk about how do we make the system better, whether or not there may be law behind it, but our processes. How do we make the handoffs in dealing with these individuals so they are clean and sober, and are safe for themselves and those around them when on the transportation network. And then lastly, in the area of impaired driving is the data. From 2014 to 15, we saw a 50+% increase in alcohol-related fatalities. And this surge is one of the largest in the country from one to the next. And so the impaired driving, the Governor's Advisory Committee is looking at resetting their strategic plan and the elements related to the strategies in that chapter in this book. And what needs to be focused. Part of our worry is that with recreational marijuana, the bright, shiny object was over here, and the core was not necessarily getting the attention that it needed to be. And that's part of that back to basics, is this particular piece. Belts, booze, and speed in Oregon still represent 65 to 67% of all the traffic fatalities in our state every year. That's the big three. And so as the recreational marijuana side and some of the other substances side does need attention, the Governor's Advisory Committee recognized that we probably want to come back and talk about what we're doing related to alcohol-impaired fatality programs. The second area is in relationship to pedestrian. And I don't know, Jackie, if you have those items, I don't know if they got passed around. Those would be great. And so one of the things that we do in the area of pedestrian safety, in that middle box related to TSD programs, is there are times when we have incentives and educational opportunities. So for all of you to earn what you just received, ask you this question. So every intersection is a crosswalk. Very good. So now you've earned your item there. And I'll explain what that is in just a second, but I'll walk through three things. First, you most recently passed the modal plan for the Safety Action Plan, and I appreciate again your approval and adoption of this document. Inside here, pedestrian safety is one of those emphasis areas. It tends to focus on the actions around infrastructure. A lot of the effort there, and these three areas related to looking at the infrastructure we do have, how does that provide safety for pedestrians? Are there some particular high-risk areas that we need to focus and call out compared to others when we look at an infrastructure set of work? And how does maintenance play in to making sure that for people that are walking, is our maintenance activities in a way that keep the system open for those people that do walk, or are confined to a situation where they are only able to walk? And for the Safety Division, we have a great working relationship with Technical Services Branch within the Highway Division, particularly around the All Roads Transportation Safety Program, and there is a call out specifically for bicyclist and pedestrian infrastructure work as part of that program. And so the two programs, we talk together about the soft side of the conversation as well as the infrastructure side. And we also recognize that the health and well-being of individuals also ties into the infrastructure side related to pedestrians. From our division point of view, as well as the infrastructure collaboration, we do a lot of outreach. And that particular piece that you were given, this is a reflector that's very, very high reflectivity. Don't wear this if you're going to take a flash photography, because your picture will completely wash out. That's how bright these are. They all have emojis. Don't ask me what your emoji is. I couldn't tell you. But the idea here, this is for elementary school kids. Something they could want a backpack, a zipper pull, maybe on a lunchbox or whatever, that is highly retroreflective, up to 500 feet away, more than what is required in law. But the idea is it's cool. And we try and find a way to find that niche with kids so that while there's something cool that's going on, and they do earn it, just as you did answering that question, typically their questions are a little harder though, but they earn these, but then they use them. And the idea is to help provide a little bit of safety for them in relationship to the retroflectivity, particular this last fall with the nighttime and early morning hours. We are involved in a lot of media effort. You saw the banner on the slide earlier. We're taking advantage of Sasquatch and that particular promotion. We have Facebook outreach, as well as YouTube, TV, and radio. And then we do sponsor a lot of special events that are part of that, the walking school bus, the back to school days, et cetera, around the state for pedestrians, with a lot of emphasis towards the young children so that they understand as they're growing up their importance in the transportation network. And then the last in this particular section is related to data. This graph is one that is out of the Safety Action Plan, and it's one that I think we will see being used a lot the next couple of years. Across the bottom is talking about how frequently a particular type of crash occurs in Oregon. And then going upward on the chart is how severe when it does occur. And you'll see that the very top in relationship to severity is motorcycles, and in that next cluster is pedestrians. Pedestrian crashes don't occur that often, but when they do, they're very severe. And then right smack in the middle is alcohol and other drugs, alcohol and then other drugs, those two compared together where they have a little bit more frequency and they're fairly severe. That cluster of 5, sharing with you 2 of those 5, those are target areas that the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee has actually asked us, as we look at our next year's plan coming to you this June, how are we addressing those particular 5, because they stand out in ways different than the rest. And then working with Mr. Mather's Highway Division, the roadway departure, which is out there a high frequency but low severity, what do we need to do related to the roadway departure as well? This is just a way of showing the comparisons and trying to say apples to apples, even though many of these things have different parameters around them. And then, Madam Chair, to close, what can we report so far this year? We've seen 2 years of increase, and as an office and as a department, leaning into the safety program in order to make a difference, because frankly, it's unacceptable to see 300, 400, 500 people killed just because we have a public transportation network in our state. What do we need to do different, and what are we doing different? And I'm pleased to report that as of this last week, within the state of Oregon, we are down almost 34% compared to where we were last year. Still 53 fatalities too many, but it is significantly down from where we have been in the past couple years. And I went back and looked over the past 5 years. The 53 fatalities through early March equals where we were in 2013. And the end of the year in 2013, we had 313 fatalities, which was our 4th lowest ever. So Oregon, also when I checked at the national level and with our states surrounding us, they aren't following this pattern. They're still seeing an increase. So we're doing something different in relationship to having that turn the other way. Would love to have zeros all over this page, and I know there are people and family and friends and neighbors that are in this conversation, but at least it's an initial positive news that as we've started to change our program and refocus on some things, that overall we're seeing the numbers come down. One of those in particular in the slide, pedestrians, which is an area of concern. That's why I raised it up this morning. And Madam Chair, would conclude with that, would ask for the Commission's consideration for accepting the 2016 performance plan, and then also the request of permission to move forward the Governor proclamation for May as Transportation Safety Awareness Month.
Troy, thank you. Really important work. One question, any correlation with more transient populations in terms, I know in our region we've had a couple, not fatalities fortunately, but individuals, dark clothing late at night, you just cannot see them in terms of, yes, for children, but there are others who are very mobile, and in particular, usually in the evening time, that we're not able to maybe see quite as well. Any discussion about that type of interaction as at your committee?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, that has popped up. So there are some other adult styles where there are things such as sash. Thank you. I want to put a T in there for some reason. But sash that can go across, or laces, shoelaces, or other types of, like on a backpack, that actually you look at them, you don't see it, but when the light hits them, it's reflective like this. Part of it is, while we can make those tools available, will they use them? And that is one of the hard parts with certain pockets of certain communities and actually certain cultures within our state. You may make things available, but if it doesn't fit within their culture that they see as a need, so why we try and figure a way to put that emoji for kids. Is there a way we can make that enticing for people that would be able to wear those things so at least they're visible?
Some of their belongings are no longer with them, and there's
Correct.
just a variety of
Correct.
things. I just wasn't aware that was, there were opportunities there too. Other comments or thoughts? Okay, please. Commissioner Lohman?
Well, I'll be a broken record again. You mentioned belts, booze, and speed being the big three, and once again, we have folks in our legislatures talking about increasing speed limits, and I just, I hope they're listening when you talk to them about this, the frequency of crashes that are speed related, and I suspect some of the aggressive driving is also speed related, and some of the roadway departure is also speed related, and some of those pedestrian injuries are speed related. So it's a big one, and we keep sort of, as a state, wanting to prioritize convenience over safety, and yet are aghast when we see the numbers go up. I know it's a hard thing to change, but I hope you keep preaching the message.
So, please.
So Troy, I know that the numbers speak volumes because they're lives, right? And if you lose one person, it's pretty impactful. But I think it would be helpful for us. We heard earlier about what's happened to the population of the state, and to see the numbers as a percentage of registered drivers, because obviously over the timeline that you gave us strictly fatality rates, the volume of registered drivers has also increased dramatically. So while the overall number of fatalities has gone up, I think it'd be nice to know the question is, as a percentage of registered drivers, are we doing a better job? And I think, some of these, as congestion increases, I see more aggressive driving. There's things that are population related that would just be nice to have some context here in how we're doing, and maybe you can talk to that now. But I also think that just for us as the commission, if there are changes in expanding the scope of what's impaired driving, maybe the transportation package currently under consideration would be the place to put those requests in. I don't know if it's in the scope of that, but it would seem like if we have if we want to amend our statement, that this is the moment to do it, because if they're going to change the law, they could very easily do it in the context of that legislation. At least that would be my hope. That and if there's a law enforcement component to it too. But anyway, I think the commission may want to make a point that it ought to be broadened. Obviously, the legislators have their own point of view, but if we feel it would be impactful to reducing the fatalities, we ought to say so.
Do we have agreement or thoughts on that?
So,
Please.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Holland, related to the rate piece, there are multiple ways to take the raw numbers and then compare them. The gold standard is on vehicle miles traveled, because that is your exposure of when an incident could occur with a motor vehicle. And on page 15 in the annual report, we do show what's happened over time with the rate increasing. While the fatalities have gone 30 to 40% high, our vehicle miles traveled has only gone up 2 or 3%. So the rate still goes up even given the increased travel. You can use licensed drivers or registered vehicles or population. Those are other rates of how to compare. And we can provide for you just a real quick one-pager that shows you the different ways each of those rates outline. But to let you know, the number one that is the best one to use is the vehicle miles traveled, because that is the actual exposure on the road related to potential of incidents.
Thank you. And I know at one point when you had gone a little deeper, you had a map showing where the fatalities were around the state, and I think getting to Commissioner Lohman's point, like sometimes the speed increases if it's in rural areas, it may not correlate to in other areas where the population is more dense, but I know that it's clearly a point, and they get it. They get it that,
Well, we did increase speeds and then reduce those speeds because we had some tragedies. So I think that's the perfect example, the unfortunate example that became reality. Okay, thank you very much. And we need some motions, if you feel so inclined. So we have two. One is accepting the annual plan, and then also an update, and then the other is the proclamation.
Madam Chair, I would move the approval of the proposed, wait, hold on, I'm getting ahead here on safety. Oh, do we need to approve Safety Awareness Month? Do we need to do that?
We can take them either way.
Okay, so request the acceptance of the 2016 Oregon Traffic Safety Performance Plan Annual Evaluation.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. And then next would be the proclamation.
And request the approval of the proposed proclamation that designates May 2017 as Transportation Safety Awareness Month for Governor Brown's signature.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
And I may have jumped forward. Do we need to make a motion on the Traffic Safety Performance Plan?
That was what we
Okay.
did, so I think
Okay,
we're
so we're
good
good.
there.
All
Yep,
right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will recess for lunch.